Thank you guys for joining us on this awesome Sunday. Unfortunately, we can't be in the building today, so we have a recorded sermon. And for those of you guys who don't know, Gia will be starting a new series soon, talking about growing our relationship with God. So I'm kind of doing a prequel to that series. So the title of today's sermon is "The Heart to Grow in Our Relationship with God." So kind of talking about the motivation, the reason, the desire, kind of foreshadowing some stuff like that. And today I actually wanted to focus on a consecutive little part of the New Testament in Matthew that Jesus talks about, and it's three parables he gives. And the context for these parables is it's getting close to Jesus' time to leave Earth. He's going to be crucified soon. He's entering Jerusalem. And they're in Jerusalem, and they're walking past the temple, and some of his disciples are commenting on how beautiful the temple is and all these things. Um, and Jesus talks about how the temple is going to be destroyed soon by Rome and things like that. And then the disciples start asking about the end times and when things like all this are going to happen. And so Jesus gives three consecutive parables about what the end times are going to be like. And so I want to take some time to talk about these parables because they're actually really important to understanding our relationship with God and really working with that. And so, the first parable I want to start with is this one. And now I'm curious, based on the image, if you guys already know what parable this might be. You can take a second to shout it out loud if you're with people or just think in your head. But the parable here is the parable of the 10 bridesmaids. And so we'll go ahead and read what Jesus says. And it says, then the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 bridesmaids who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 of them were wise. The 5 who were foolish didn't take enough olive oil for their lamps, but the other 5 were wise enough to take along extra olive oil. Uh, when the bridegroom was delayed, they all became drowsy and fell asleep. At midnight, they were roused by the shout, "Look, the bridegroom is coming! Come out and meet him!" All the bridesmaids got up and prepared their lamps. Then the 5 foolish ones asked the others, "Please give us some of your oil because our lamps are going out." But the others replied, "We don't have enough for all of us. Go to a shop and buy some for yourselves." But while they were gone to buy oil, the bridegroom came. Then those who were ready went in with him and to the marriage feast, and the door was locked. Later, when the 5 bridesmaids returned, they stood outside calling, "Lord, Lord, open the door for us." But he called back to them, "Believe me, I don't know you. So you too must keep watch, for you do not know the day or the hour of my return." And so, to explain a little bit of the story, it was a custom at that time when a groom is marrying a bride that he would actually go to her house and they would go on a journey of bringing her from her house to his house. And it would be a journey like that. And then once they got to where they were going, they would have a big celebration. And so, these bridesmaids are going out and they're hoping to meet them on the road, but the groom takes longer than expected. And so, those who had been prepared are able to go into the dinner with the groom, but those who were unprepared were left outside. And so that's kind of the gist of the story, but the context obviously here is interesting. So we're talking about the end times, and so what Jesus is making the point of is there's those of us who are going to be wise in preparing for God coming home, and there's those of us who will be foolish. And this comes down to a little bit of estimating when you think this time will be, right? And this kind of goes to the idea of some of us feel like there will always be more time to fix our relationship with God, or there will be a time when I figure it out and all that kind of stuff, and we just kind of keep putting it off, and then we end up being caught unaware and that kind of thing. But here's the other part that's really interesting about the story is not only are they ill prepared and that they come kind of at the last minute and the doors are already locked and they say, "Hey, I want to come in," but the response they receive is, "I don't know you." Right? And this is, if you know some other parables in the Bible, this isn't the only place where the phrase "I don't know you" appears when talking about getting into heaven. And so it's really interesting that it also appears here. And so I want to talk a little bit about what it means to know God. And so this word "know" is actually ginosko in Greek. And so I'm going to read this little phrase here for you. It says, "The English verb know appears many times throughout the Bible. The same word is used as translations of various Greek words with slightly different meanings. The most commonly used of these are the verbs ginosko and ido. Gnosko refers to a deep, intimate knowledge, such as when Jesus said, I know my sheep. Gnosko is also used in the Septuagint, where we read in Genesis 4:1, and Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore a son. The verb in that context describes the most intimate knowledge a man and a woman can share. Gnosko seems to be almost synonymous with love, as in John 10:14. And so what we see here is an interesting thing of the know that we're talking about isn't just like, oh, I know about you, or I know of you, or I've met you before. What it's talking about is an intimate and deep knowledge of one another, right? And in this case, it was even used to describe intimacy between a husband and a wife. And so this idea of knowing God is what was the issue for the bridesmaids is they weren't prepared because they weren't maintaining their relationship with God. That's what the lamp is supposed to represent, the oil, right? Is this maintaining of a relationship with God. And at the last minute, you're expecting somebody else's relationship with God to be enough for you to get into heaven. But this idea of those people who were wise, the five wise bridesmaids, maintained their relationship with God and knew Him deeply so that when they got to the wedding feast, they were able to go in. Right, an example of gnosko being used, one of my favorite ideas and understanding of what it truly means to know God, is in John 17. This is Jesus' prayer, and it's also really close to the crucifixion. He's praying to God about us, really. He says, my prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, us, that all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one. I in them and you in me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me. Father, I want those you have given me to be with me where I am, and to see my glory and the glory you have given me, because you loved me before the creation of the world. Righteous Father, though the world does not know you, I know you, and they know that you have sent me. I have made you known to them, and will continue to make you known, in order that the love you have for me may be in them, and that I myself may be in them. And so taking this knowledge of gnosko and to know, and talking about an intimate, deep knowledge, is talking about how Jesus knows God, and then he's saying, I want to make them known to you in the same way I know you. Right? And so this is the idea of what it means to when Jesus is saying, I never knew you versus I do know you. It's not a matter of do you know about God? Have you heard about him before? Have you been to church? Do you know your Bible? It's a matter of do you intimately have a relationship with him? Right? And I'm not talking about doom and gloom of heaven and hell. I'm talking about just this is the desire, is that God's desire for us is to know him intimately, to have a deep, continuous relationship, right? The struggle with the bridesmaids that were foolish is they didn't have a continuous relationship with God, and they didn't have a deep relationship with God, right? And this tends to be a big struggle a lot of times for people who have been around Christianity for a long time or been to the church for a long time, is you start to make God into a routine. And two things can tend to happen when you make God into a routine is you section him off into specific times. And then along with that, you turn it into mundane tasks as opposed to deep, intimate relationship. Right? In the same way with the marriage, sometimes if you just box things in, it never becomes a deep relationship. And in the same way, if you fail to go deep into that thing, it becomes very, very unhealthy. And so in the same way here in our relationship with God is we need to not just section them off into specific times and hope those times are enough, and not just make those times into tasks, but to actually have a deep, continuous relationship with him, to keep that lamp burning, right? And so I know this is one of the mistakes I can fall into is sometimes I just section God off into the church times or the quiet times and things like that, and then we'll go throughout my day and I don't really have much of a deep relationship with him at times. And so this is a good reminder for us is that when we're talking about having the heart to work on our relationship with God, it's not just sectionable times and it's not just tasks. It's a matter of truly knowing and existing with him continuously. And so to continue, I have a little meme for us, and it says, when the other bridesmaids won't give me some of their oil, even though I didn't bring enough of my own. Just I don't know. I thought it'd be funny to include some stuff since it's a little more serious of a topic to have some funny jokes. Hopefully, if you find it funny. But to continue, we have our next parable. And I wonder if by this image you might be able to guess what parable this is. But if you haven't already, this is the parable of the talents. And so to start with the parable of the talents, again, this appears right after the parable of the bridesmaids. It says, again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. He called together his servants and entrusted his money to them while he was gone. He gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last, dividing it in proportion to their abilities. He then left on his trip. The servant who received 5 bags of silver began to invest the money and earned 5 more. The servant with 2 bags of silver also went to work and earned 2 more. But the servant who received the 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground and hid the master's money. After a long time, their master returned from his trip and called them to give an account of how they had used his money. The servant to whom he had entrusted the 5 bags of silver came forward with 5 more and said, Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 5 more. The master was full of praise. Well done, my good and faithful servant. You've been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. The servant who had received 2 bags of silver came forward and said, Master, you gave me 2 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 2 more. The master said, Well done, my good and faithful servant. You've been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together. Then the servant with 1 bag of silver came and said, Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here is your money back. But the master replied, You wicked and lazy servant. If you knew I harvested crops I didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate, you didn't, and why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it. Then he ordered, Take the money from this servant and give it to the one with 10 bags of silver. To those who use well what they are given, even more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But to those who do nothing, even what little they have will be taken away. Now throw this useless servant into outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So again, we have another story, and this one has a master, and he gives a different amounts of money to 3 of his servants. And he gives 5, he gives 2, and he gives 1. And he gives them with the expectation that they will use this money in such a way as to benefit the master when he returns. The one with 5 produces 5 more, and the one with 2 produces 2 more. The one with 1 just buries it. And so before we get into any of this, I want to start with 2 key things that I think we take for granted or maybe overlook. So to start with is this first word that I have highlighted in red, this idea of it's his money, right? And so for those who don't know, this is called the parable of talents, right? And so these bags of silver are supposed to represent talents and gifts and things like that. Some talents can be your ability to public speak, could be your ability to be social, your ability to know a lot, your ability to have wealth, even all these different things that you might have that might be skills or talents or things you possess that are unique to you. The first point that Jesus makes is that these things that we have are not our own, that they are actually his, that he has entrusted to us, right? Whether it be wealth, whether it be looks, whether it be intelligence, whether it be charismaticness, whatever it might be, all these things he's entrusted to us, and he gives it to us, and he says, all right, now I'm going to go away for a while. I'm giving you this as a responsibility, and I'm testing you to see what kind of person you're going to be with what I have given you. And he even makes it clear, I don't give to everyone equally. Some of you will have 5, some of you will have 2, some of you will have 1. But what he does do equally is, regardless of how many he gives, he comes back and he asks us to give an account of what we did with what was given to us, right? And notice that when the 5 produces 5 more, he says, well done, good and faithful servant, let's celebrate. And then when the one comes back with 2, the guy who had 2 silver and produces 2 more, he says, well done, good and faithful servant. And so we see, regardless of the amount of talents you have, it's always possible to meet the expectation or the account, right? Because the account and the expectation is that what I have given to you, you will return back and be fruitful with it, right? And so that is the expectation. And when we meet that expectation, it is a celebration thing, is something to be proud of. Well done, good and faithful servant. But then we meet the one who has 1, right? And his mentality with his money is he goes and he buries it in the sand. And when it comes time to give an account, he testifies that he was afraid, right? And he was afraid of the master, afraid of what might happen if things go wrong, right? And look at what the the master says. It's interesting. The master doesn't say, "You wicked and cowardly servant." It's interesting. He doesn't say cowardly, even though the servant claims he was afraid. He doesn't say you wicked and cowardly. He says you wicked and lazy. And so what we see about that is most likely what the point is here is that this servant is most likely making an excuse of, hey, I didn't do it because I was just too afraid of what would happen if things went wrong. But the master sees through it and says, hey, actually, no, you were lazy. I gave you responsibilities and you chose not to do what I asked. And that's where you were wrong. He's like, if you knew I was truly somebody to be afraid of, you would have done at least this. This was the bare minimum, right? And so it's making this point of, hey, be faithful with what I've given you. Don't give in to the fear or the laziness, but be fruitful with it, right? And then he makes this point of taking away the silver that that one servant had and giving it to the five. And he says the statement of, to those who use what they are given well, even more will be given. And this makes sense. This is the equivalent of if you gave somebody a task and they do well in it and they're responsible, you want to give them more tasks, and vice versa. If you give somebody a small task and they can't even complete the small task, you're not going to give them a bigger task, right? And so this is the heart that Jesus is saying is, so the first parable talked a lot about our individual relationship with God and in the sense of maintaining that and having deep intimacy with God and loving Him and being complete in that. And this part is talking about, okay, now while I am not present with you physically in this world, what are you going to do with what I have given you, right? Are you going to be faithful to use what I've been given to you to expand my kingdom, to take care of my things, right? And then if you are faithful when the time comes, I can reward you with even more. And if you are unfaithful, then there's not much I can do with that, but take it away and give it to those who are faithful, right? And so again, we see this idea of it's not just a one-time thing in our relationship with God, but it's a continuous thing of, are we truly using what God has given us to expand His kingdom, right? If we're talking about growing our relationship with God and having the heart to do that, part of that is looking at, well, what has God already given me and how can I use that for Him, right? And their talents change and grow all the time. For instance, when I first came to this church, I hated public speaking, absolutely despised it. One of my least favorite things to do. I was a very antisocial, shy guy. But my talent that I had at the time was willingness. I did not have the public speaking talent, but I had willingness. And so my first thing that I remember doing for the church is I remember coming and passing around communion and then cleaning up communion after it was done. That was my first service of talents to God's kingdom. And when I proved faithful with that, I was put in charge of more. And so, in the same way, just examining, okay, what are the talents God has given me in this time, and am I truly being faithful to use those talents, right? Would it be said of me that I was lazy with my talents, or I was afraid with my talents, or would it be said, hey, I've been faithful with my talents, and that we can celebrate that? And so, with that, I have another funny meme for us, and just when Jesus reading account of how I spent my talents, and just sadness for not using His talents. Anyway, I find these funny. I hope you do too. But we come to our last parable. And so, again, I'll give you a chance to maybe internally guess what this parable is. But if you haven't already, this is the parable of the sheep and the goats. And so, in the parable of the sheep and the goats, again, this one goes right after the parable of the talents. And so, this is the third one when he's talking about what the end times will be like. He says, but when the Son of Man comes in His glory and all the angels with Him, then He will sit upon His glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered in His presence, and He will separate the people as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will place the sheep at His right hand and the goats at His left. Then the King will say to those on His right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me. Then these righteous ones will reply, Lord, when did we ever see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink, or a stranger and show you hospitality, or naked and give you clothing? When did I ever see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the King will say, I tell you the truth, when you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it for me. Then the King will turn to those on his left and say, away with you, you cursed ones, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his demons. For I was hungry, and you didn't feed me. I was thirsty and you didn't give me a drink. I was a stranger and you didn't invite me into your home. I was naked and you didn't give me clothing. I was sick and in prison and you didn't visit me. Then they will reply, Lord, when did we ever see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and not help you? And he will answer, I tell you the truth, when you refuse to help the least of these my brothers and sisters, you are refusing to help me. And they will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous will go into eternal life. So here we have the third and the final of the parables that he tells about it. And this one goes in a different direction, right? In the first one, we talked about maintaining our relationship with God and having deep intimacy. In the second one, we talked about using our talents for God and expanding his kingdom and being faithful in that regard. But this one is talking about our treatment of others, right? And so it gets to the point where people are being let into heaven and being sent to hell. And the determining factor, what he's talking about here in this parable, is there's those who took care and treated the people with love in their life, and there's those who didn't. And both of them are shocked because they both say, well, we never saw you physically, Jesus or God or the Holy Spirit. And when did we ever do these things for you? And in the case of the goats, when did we not do these things for you? And Jesus says, hey, when you were doing these for other people, you were truly doing these for me. And so what Jesus is making the point of is, hey, part of your relationship with me, part of having a deep one with me is taking care of the people around you, right? Because if Jesus equates us, if God equates us to being his children, right, then the way we take care of others is the way we're taking care of his children. In the same way, especially for you, those of you who are parents, I'm sure it's easy to imagine that you would want somebody to take care of your child and love them, right? If you weren't able to be there for them, you would hope that they would give them something to drink, to clothe them when they're naked, to visit them if you couldn't, to give them food, or if they were sick, to take care of them, right? In the same way, God wants us to do that for each other, right? And sometimes we can do those for some people, and sometimes not for others. And so God is making the point, hey, when you do it for the least of these people, you're doing it for me. All right. And to give us our meme again, it's how the goats were treating people. It was nice to meet you. Now go away, right? In this heart of, I want to do what I want to do for me, and you are distracting me from that, right? And so the lessons learned from each of these parables, right, to summarize them, in the bridesmaids, it's about maintaining a true relationship with God at all times, not just in moments. In the parable of the talents, it's to be faithful and to use whatever God has given you to help his kingdom. If we are faithful to do so, we will receive more. If we are not, what little we have will be given to those who are faithful. And the sheep and the goats, it's our relationship with God extends to those we meet. We must treat others as we would treat Jesus. This shows him love. Right, and so we have this simple ideas of these three parables, and right, and so we have this idea of our individual relationship with God. We have this idea of how we're using what God has given us, and we have this idea of how we're treating those around us, right? And these three factors go into, are we truly having the heart to grow in our relationship with God? Are we truly putting these things into practice, right? And so I want to leave off with one last scripture. And this is in 1 Corinthians 3:10 through 15. And this is talking about building a relationship with God, building our journey with God. And it says, by the grace God has given me, I laid a foundation as a wise builder, and someone else is building on it. But each one should build with care. For no one can lay any foundation other than the one already laid, which is Jesus Christ. If anyone builds on this foundation using gold, silver, and costly stones, wood, hay, or straw, their work will be shown for what it is, because the day will bring it to light. It will be revealed with fire, and the fire will test the quality of each person's work. If what has been built survives, the builder will receive a reward. If it is burned up, the builder will suffer loss, but yet be saved, even though only as one escaping through the flames. And so this is Paul writing to the Corinthian church, and he's making this point about it doesn't how we build our relationship with God and how we build it in others people's, and making this point of the foundation is Christ, but how we build upon that foundation will show through for what it is, right? If we take the time to really develop a deep relationship with God, right, using this gold and silver and costly stones, it'll be shown for what it is. But if we cut corners and we're unfaithful, and use the wood, the hay, and the straw, it'll be shown for what it is. And note the materials chosen and the test that they have to go under. The test is fire. If you have a house built of wood, hay, or straw, that thing is going up like a tinderbox. But if you're built with gold, silver, and costly stones, you'll survive that. Right? And another point of this too is it requires more to build with costly materials, right? It requires more time, more money, and more effort to build with gold, silver, and other stones versus wood, hay, and straw, right? And so he's making this point of taking the time to build the relationship wisely and to understand that what we build will be shown for what it is, right? And so those three parables, Jesus is making this point of don't be lazy and wait and just cut corners and do things in moments. Don't be unfaithful with what I've given you, and don't forget to treat others with the same ways you would want to treat me, right? And so the same thing here for us right now, the lesson to be learned is, hey, are we taking the time to build our relationship, right? As we're going into this series that Gio's gonna start for us, is thinking about it is, are we being a wise builder in our relationship? Are we taking the time to maintain a deep relationship? Are we using what God has given us? And are we being faithful to extend that to others, right? And so, lastly, I just have some homework for you guys. It's not too bad. I think it's doable. You could even do it today, but take some time to examine the three parables again on your own and see which one stands out to you. All the scriptures were up there on the screen the whole time, and you can find them all in Matthew chapter, I believe, 25. Should have all three of them. So you can look through them, see which one sticks out to you. One of them will probably impact you a little more than others. And then whichever one sticks out to you, take the time to work on the quality that applies to that parable. So if it's the bridesmaids, go deeper in your times with God, or be more continuous in your relationship with God, not just keeping him to one part of your day. Or if it's already been a struggle to just do that every day, then okay, figure out how can I maintain a daily schedule with God, right? If it's the parable of the talents, examining the gifts God has given you, try writing them down, all the talents you think you possess, and then try writing next to it a little bullet point of, okay, how do I use this talent for God's kingdom, right? And if there's a talent that you're like, oh wait, I have that, but I don't really use that to glorify God, maybe start to think a little bit, okay, how can I use that to glorify God, right? If it's the sheeps and the goats, looking at, okay, how have I been treating the other people in my life, right? Have I been treating them as if they were Jesus, or have I been treating them selfishly? Both the people I'm close with, the fringe people, and just the random strangers. Am I treating them in the way I would treat Christ in that situation, right? So just looking at those three parables, and pick just one to start of how does this one stick out to you, and how can you apply it currently to your life? Thank you guys for listening in, and I hope you have a great Sunday and Happy New Year.